And the Lord God formed man out of the dust of the ground, and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living being. My name's Arthur. Thank you for joining me as we turn to Genesis chapter 2. And here we have another account of creation, which some say contradicts the first, given in chapter 1. But in actual fact it complements it, simply taking another perspective. For chapter 1 deals with the big picture, the orderly construction of the heavens and the earth as a place for man to dwell in, and it culminates with the creation of man. Whereas the second chapter focuses much more on man, because man is the great objective and everything else exists to support men living on the earth. We'll read first of all verses 1 to 9 of chapter 2. Thus the heavens and the earth and all the host of them were finished. And on the seventh day God ended his work which he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had done. Then God blessed the seventh day, and sanctified it, because on it he rested from all his work which God had created and made. This is the history of the heavens and the earth, when they were created in the day that the Lord God made the earth and the heavens, before any plant of the earth was in the earth, and before any herb of the field had grown. For the Lord God had not caused it to rain on the earth, and there was no man to till the ground. But a mist went up from the earth, and watered the whole face of the ground. And the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground, and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living being. The Lord God planted a garden eastward in Eden, and there he put the man whom he had formed. And out of the ground the Lord God made every tree grow that is pleasant to the sight, and good for food. The tree of life was also in the midst of the garden, and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And may the Lord bless these words to us. Well, there are two sections in what we've read this morning. The first one is really the conclusion of the creation account, for the creation occurred in 6 days, and so at the end of the 6th day we're told that the heavens and the earth and all the host of them were finished. And on the 7th day God ended his work. He was finished. And he rested on the 7th day. This explanation was all written by Moses, and it ties in then to the commandment, 6 days shall man work, but on the 7th day he shall rest, because God created the heavens and the earth in 6 days, and rested on the 7th. That law was specifically given to Israel, and is part of the covenant that God made with that nation. In our society, the tradition of having Sunday as a day off is being broken down by those who do not want to acknowledge God, and people are increasingly treating Sunday as an ordinary day. Problem is that men are not taking the opportunity of worshipping God that is afforded by having 1 day a week as a day of rest. But the New Testament urges us not to forget the gathering together of ourselves, to worship God and to remember the works of God, because the first step away from God is to stop giving him thanks, as Romans 1 tells us. Well, God has blessed the 7th day and set it apart that it might be a day of rest. So God had completed the work that he was doing. Then we move into the next section, which is focused on man. And he says this is the history, or the genealogies, or the generations of the heavens and the earth. And this becomes a phrase that is repeated through the early part of Genesis, as Moses brings together various accounts of things that were handed down to him and incorporates them in this document. For Moses didn't invent these things, but as this phrase indicates, documents were passed down to him. And so The first chapter was obviously supplied directly by God because there was no one else around at that point to explain what God did and the order in which God did things. But when we come to this chapter, we have the events very much from the perspective of man. So, at the beginning, as Adam remembers and looks back, he recalls the garden where he first became conscious. Now, the Lord God made the heavens and the earth, and when he made them, initially there was no plant in the field. He had to create the plant as well. It appears that during this pre-flood period there was no rain on the earth, but God had set up a system in the earth where a dew came down upon the earth in the evening and watered the earth. And so during the day the moisture would rise, and during the evening the moisture would settle, and so watered the face of the whole earth. The general characteristic of the earth was quite different from what it is now. The evidence of the great continental shift, well, that would not have happened. So the continents would have been together in one place at this period of time, and that's indicated by the wording that's given here. And the environment was much more uniform because of the fact that the earth appears to have been enveloped in a high atmosphere envelope of water, and that water would have two effects. A dominant one would be to ensure the protection of the earth from a lot of radiation from the sun and from outer space. But another one would have been to maintain a greenhouse effect on the earth, maintaining its environment. Now, the key thing is, and the first thing that is mentioned here, is that the Lord God formed a man of the dust of the earth and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living being. So this account puts man first, because man logically is the whole reason that the universe was created. So while in chapter 1 man is put in his place after the other creatures in a chronological sense, in a logical sense man is first, because man is the purpose of the whole creation. So once the earth was formed, man was formed from the dust of the ground. But then there needed to be a place for man to go, and so we're told about the Garden of Eden. And this was where man, as it were, woke up in the garden that God had planted. He had made trees to grow that were pleasant for the sight and good for food. So God is not concerned just to keep us alive, but he wants to put us in an environment that is pleasant and enjoyable. The first tree that is particularly named is the tree of life, was also in the midst of the garden, and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. It's fascinating that this tree is mentioned here, because when we come to the end of the Bible, John picks up on the tree of life, and it is again made available to men. It was available in the garden at the beginning. It's part of God's eternal plan that we should live and live and live and not die. And the tree of life is a key to that. But when sin came in, men were barred from access to the tree of life. So God has created Adam and placed him in a garden. It is a pleasant place, and he has set up the environment for man to enjoy. And we can still enjoy, men still enjoy their gardens, and a lot of effort is expended in making beautiful gardens, because that's the environment in which God intended man to live, in a pleasant garden with good food.